Hi, this is Drew Jones of Drew's Guitar Shop in Seattle, Washington. I'm going to apologize for the shaky cam here, but I'm going to be taking you down this guitar here that I have in front of me, which is a little Epiphone Dot that just came in a little while back. I did a video some years back about bad frets and kind of like, what to look for on guitars. As far as obvious fret problems like lifted frets and things like dings and nicks and worn frets that are worn down too low or been level crown polished all the way down to the board, things like that most players can just kind of look at and see. This guitar has something else going on that I talked about in that video, but I didn't really have a good example of, which is that this guitar is new, and it was purchased new, by the customer who brought this in. And on top of having a little bit of a buzz going on, which we're also going to be dealing with while we're here, it's something related to one of the pieces of hardware on this guitar that we're going to be either tightening up or loosening or modifying in such a way that it doesn't buzz. It also has fret problems. And the fret problems that it has are basically from right out of the box. The fretwork was just not done very well. I'm not terribly surprised that this is the case. This is an Epiphone Dot. For those of you not really familiar with Epiphone's line, the Epiphone Dot, is a 335-ish style guitar that's kind of like, I guess this would be kind of the equivalent of a Gibson Studio model, which is that it's it's not very flashy. It doesn't have like the fancy inlays. It has a pretty plain top on it and a pretty plain finish job and everything. So this guitar, what they had in mind with it when they designed it was that this was going to be kind of a studio and stay-at-home guitar. And so these are generally kind of the bottom of the line. They're sold new for 200 something, I guess. That was at least what I was told by the customer, and I believe them because I have seen these up for sale for about that much. And so to kind of put this in perspective, when I charge to do a refret on a guitar, I charge more than this guitar costs. So you can imagine how much time and effort was probably put into these frets, which is probably not much. And if we go down here, and this is why I have the kind of a shaky cam right now, is because I wanted to take y'all down and really look at these frets. Because kind of what I see with these is that you see kind of a lot of little sharp corners around the edge. You can see that they're not particularly shiny. They almost look like they really haven't been touched on top with a fret leveler. If we come over from the side, you can actually see a little bit of space under a few of these frets, where you could probably fit a feeler gauge or maybe fit a little thin piece of paper. But that little dark strip down there is a gap. You can see that it gets finer as it goes towards the edge. This should be an example of something that you could see, but what you're probably not going to see is that these frets are also unlevel. I really don't like recommending tools and gadgets here so much, just because I really don't like participating in kind of the hangers-on sort of corporate manufacture of demand that kind of exists within that sort of area with guitar accessories and things. But one thing that I might recommend for folks, and maybe one cool friend could buy this thing and share it with people when they're going out and buying a guitar. This is a fret rocker from StewMac. There are other companies that you can order these from. This is kind of one of StewMac's cheaper tools, but what this is just a straight edge that is very small and has a bunch of angles on it so that you can span 3 frets going all the way down the board. And what this will tell you is whether or not, there are high spots in the board. Because when this encounters a high fret, what it's going to do is it's going to rock, and you'll hear it. You hear that knocking? That's this thing kind of rocking back because this fret here is high. And what that's causing when we have this guitar set up with the action that we want to see is it's causing buzzing. The action that you're able to get on a guitar is largely determined by like the health of the rest of the instrument. So if the frets aren't healthy, if they're not all completely level, the setup that you're going to be able to get on that guitar without buzzing is going to need to be higher in order to clear those unlevel frets. Now, if you have level frets, you'll be able to go down perhaps even lower than the minimum recommended action, and if you're a soft player, just because you're not going to encounter those high spots on the fretboard. But in this case, I just had to call this customer and tell him that the options in the case of this guitar were either that we were going to have to go higher with the action and just kind of deal with it, or that, if he's a light player, we could just go ahead and kind of deal with the buzzes. Or the third option, which is the more recommendable of the solutions, which is to do a level crown and polish. Now, when we do a level crown and polish, we are doing more than just like a leveling of the frets. I think a lot of people have this idea that you're just mowing off the tops of the frets and that's pretty much the end of the work, but that's actually not the way that that works. If we draw a profile of a fret here, we see that the fret gets installed, it's round. When we level the frets, there's a little bit of, top of the fret that's, taken off. And we're left with this flat surface on top. Now, if we just leave that there, what's going to end up happening is as the string makes contact with that fret, it may contact back here or it may contact up here. You have this little gap in here that can cause kind of a buzzing problem. You have these two different potential contact points that may produce an intonation problem. It usually does. And just having a non-sharp contact point really does kind of reduce the sharpness of those notes. It's going to hurt your tone. And so what we do is we go in and we recrown the frets after. We have a special file for this that's got a little curve in it, and we can kind of recreate that round surface. This is a god-awful drawing, I'm so sorry. But we're knocking off those corners and we're bringing it back to a kind of a round point on top so that the string has an easy place to rest. And that is right on the center of the fret as opposed to either side of the center. And that center of the fret really represents like kind of mathematically where that tone should be produced on that fretboard. So in the case of this guitar, this, again, I'm going to say a new guitar, we are already having to go in and do some expensive fretwork to it. This is going to run $160 here. Different shops will price out a level crown and polish differently depending on, what somebody likes doing, how good they are at it, how fast they are at it, whatever. But here I charge $160 for it. These frets are going to be perfect when I'm done. I'm very meticulous about fretwork when I get it in here, and I really enjoy doing fretwork, but we are going to have to work these frets before this guitar can take the setup that the customer wants this guitar to have, and that is really unfortunate. This is the sort of thing that, in my opinion, should be taken care of at the factory, but of course, this is, a very, this is kind of a lower end guitar. And again, like doing a full fret job on this guitar, if I was doing a refret, would cost more than the guitar originally sold for. And so, kind of the question that I'll throw at people when somebody says, well, how much should I spend on a guitar? I'll say, well, how much would you charge someone to build one? And, usually I'll kind of get a deer in the headlights look because most people have never really considered having a guitar hand built for them. But, I'll then say, if I was asked to build a guitar, we're looking at around, $2,000-$3,000. Which, when you're going to Guitar Center, that's kind of the price range that you're seeing some of the nicer Gibsons and Martins at. And, that's to start off. A lot of builders would charge way more than that to build a guitar. And so you need to consider the amount of work that's going into these lower end guitars and kind of ask yourself, if a guitar, truthfully costs this much to produce, what corners are being cut in order to sell it for 0.5 that price? That's a 5% of that price. It's really it's really kind of a staggering thing when you think about it at that point, because there are always major corners being cut, and one of the main places that I see that happen is these frets. And so, again, I'll caution people out there about, going below that 300 mark, because I think that that's really where you start seeing this kind of stuff. Everything else about the guitar looks great. The finish looks all pretty, and it's guitar shaped, and it's got decent-ish hardware on it. But this fret job here is just preventing us from having a viable instrument, and that's just really really unfortunate considering that it's new. So again, I'm just going to kind of throw this out there that getting a guitar for new that is cheap is not always that great a deal, because at the end of the day, you may end up having to spend more on that guitar getting it playable than you spent on the guitar in the first place. You may be stuck with some weird issues like some buzzing or some humming or some rattling or some other, playability problems that are going to affect the way that you're playing. And if you are a student, you might not even know enough about the instrument in order to tell that those things are problems that are out of the ordinary. And so it kind of is a minefield these days when you're going to buy like a student range guitar. It's one of the reasons why with the student end guitars here that I put so much work into them to get them up to my standard to send them out the door, because I don't want students to be playing their guitar weird and developing bad habits, or learning that this buzz is just, I guess, what guitars do, and then I don't know, maybe giving up the instrument because they didn't like the way that it played or that it sounded, and I think that that's really sad. So again, if you were going to spend any money on some gizmos to really go look at guitars, I guess the recommendations that I would make, fret rocker would really be the one tool that I might invest a little bit of money in from Stu Mac. They do sell these on eBay that are not machined. Some of the ones that I've seen on eBay have, they're just molded or stamped, and you can tell that the edges of it haven't really been machined. And the machining is really important because these things do need to be very, very accurate in order to detect those rocking frets. So I would buy your fret rocker from a reputable company. I would get it from Stu Mac, or get it from like Brown's Guitar Factory or like LMI or one of those places. But make sure that it's machined. And if you get one of the ones that's cheap and you happen to know somebody who can do machining, have them, machine it into a little straight edge for you. And kind of off topic for, this particular guitar, but one of the other things that I would recommend picking up if you're going to look at guitars is a mirror and a flashlight. Doesn't have to be anything fancy, but what you do want to be able to do is on acoustic guitars, you want to be able to take a gander at what's inside and see how the braces are hanging on, because that's another area where I see people kind of run into trouble buying guitars. And unfortunately, that also includes new guitars. Once in a while, I'll get something in that was bought new that has some internal problems, like worn through or busted out bridge plate, or even some braces that are kind of shaking loose. But especially with vintage guitars, if you're looking at older guitars, you want to make sure that you bring along a mirror and kind of take a look inside and see what's going on. The guitar tools that I generally see people recommend for, taking out and looking at stuff are like these guitar action gauges and things like that. And I won't say that those things aren't useful. They are, but the action really only tells you how good the setup is, and it may not tell you why the setup on that particular guitar is bad. If you're interested, I've got a video about how to tell whether a guitar needs a neck reset, and I've got some other stuff in a playlist that I've created for kind of stuff that buyers should be aware of before they go and try to pick up a guitar. And that would be kind of more of where I would put my mind in terms of like how high the strings are off the board, because just because a guitar has a bad setup, I wouldn't not buy it because of that. Like, you can just take it in and get it set up for really cheap. But you do want to know if it can take a low setup, and what's going to be important there is, is the guitar structurally together? Is the neck angle good? And like as the topic of this video, you want to make sure that the frets are good, because if those things are off, you're not going to be able to get the setup that you want. You're not going to be happy with the guitar, and you may end up having to dump a lot more money into that guitar than it's worth, or perhaps you planned on paying for it in the end, and it can start getting very expensive very quickly. So, this has been Drew Jones of Drew's Guitar Shop in Seattle, Washington. I hope that you enjoyed this video. If you did, I have a lot more like it. If you found it helpful and you want to kick me a few bucks on my Ko-fi or my Patreon, those are links that you can find in the description of the video, as well as a link to that playlist that I mentioned, and the video about neck resets. I have a website that's also linked down there where you can check out my prices, and you can get my contact information. If you happen to be in the Seattle area and in need of repair work, I'd be happy to hear from you, and I could take a look at what you got and help you out. Thanks for watching.